One of my favorite genres is my own personal and vaguely undefinable weird Japanese genre. Japanese games that revel in their absurdity, whether in gameplay or presentation. Your Katamari Damacy's, your Space Channel 5s, hey, even WarioWare falls under the category in my books. These are the games that are just wholly weird, wacky, fun, niche, and really charming. And of course, this is hardly a real genre and an entirely subjective one at that. But the games my brain puts in them are all too often standouts of my collection, and ones I often go back to just for some silly fun. And more recently, one of these games has found itself back in the limelight of accessibility, so I thought, why not? Let's give it a look in. Welcome to the world of Kuru Kuru Kururin. This little hidden gem of Nintendo's properties was released in 2001 initially, even being a launch title for the GBA in PAL countries. Though like many good hidden gems, it never rocked up in North America for some reason. It was developed by Eighting, who are also well known for their works with Zatch Bell, Momoto Battles, and Kamen Rider Climax Heroes W. Or if those world-renowned titles somehow slipped under your radar, it's also worth mentioning they developed Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Pikmin 4. The game sees the titular Kururin piloting this disastrous feat of engineering, the Heroine, a constantly rotating helicopter-esque flying machine. The goal is to simply navigate tight spaces in an attempt to reach the goal without touching the walls, and if you do, it explodes, viscerally shattering into many pieces. A cruel reality check for the folly of only asking if you could, not if you should. On a related note, Kuru Kuru is the Japanese onomatopoeia for spinning, so that should help make the title make a bit more sense. Anyway, the story begins when our blue-feathered protagonist is tasked with finding all of his missing siblings who have disappeared off into the great wide world. With some training by Professor Hare under his belt, he sets off on the world's finest death trap to go and find them. What a guy. Assumedly, he's perfectly capable of flying on his own, and his siblings only got to where they are by flying around too. So honestly, I don't know why the heroine is even involved here, but we wouldn't have a game otherwise, so I'll let it slide. The levels are made up of tight corners and pathways for you to navigate, with obstacles and gadgets appearing to hinder and help respectively. Springs allow you to change the direction of rotation, and that's actually the end of the helping list. On the hinder side are spiked balls, cannons, and whatever these things are meant to be. Initially, the levels appear to be rather easy, with very little stopping you from just breezing through them. But that's a very false representation of where the game goes. The difficulty quickly ramps up, and you'll quickly find yourself responsible for Kururin's horrifying death over and over again. Most levels also have one of 3 types of collectibles that you can use to customize your heroine. These come in the form of different colors, shapes, and even the option to have Kururin's rescued siblings sit atop the heroine. Apart from Kururin's siblings, however, they are all optional, so you need not go out of your way if you don't really care. What is not optional though is perfection, literally. To see the credits roll, you have to get a perfect rating on every level, which means never taking a hit of damage before reaching the goal. And that's where I humbly bow out, knowing full well I'm not going to commit to that level of heroine mastery. Likewise, you'll have noticed that each level also has a time trial element to it, with high scores of completion times always being prevalent on the results screen. These are not kind, not even the first level. They're really brutal beasts, make no mistake. And your reward for beating all these dastardly time challenges? A whole new set of even crueler times to beat, of course. Also, you get a little symbol next to your profile. Yay! But it's for these reasons that I believe that Kururin appeals to 2 main experiences. One being simply getting through the game and enjoying the ride, and the other aiming for high scores and perfect runs to truly master the game. And I think that's super cool that both can exist without impeding much on the other. Well, other than properly seeing the ending and the last few levels, I suppose, but hey, the ending isn't really worth it, so as far as I'm concerned, you can enjoy the game to its near fullest, just enjoying the journey without needing to get all that sweaty. Outside of the main game as well, there are a few other modes. Practice mode, where you can work on specific areas of levels with a regenerating health bar, challenge mode, where there are short and sweet time trials, and finally there's a multiplayer mode, which is actually quite accessible with the NSO now. I've personally never tried it, but I believe it's racing through levels found in challenge mode. Rather impressed that they had some linkable fun times in a game this early in the pipeline. Considering there isn't much in the way of differences between these modes, It's hard to say it breaks up the gameplay all that much, but still a hefty chunk of good spinny goodness to get into. And that's Kuru Kuru Kururin. All in all, it's a really fun little quirky game for the GBA that understandably does fall a bit by the wayside. Feels a bit like a proof of concept with how short and simple it is, if I'm honest. Fits in super well with the GBA library though. And thinking about it, it probably did everything it wanted to with the concept. It does have a bit of legacy left behind too outside the game, with the Heroine being an assistant trophy in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and the cartridge appears in Pikmin 4 as a treasure. Oh, and it did get a sequel. Enter Kururin Paradise. Released on the GBA a year later, in 2002, Paradise is a relatively obscure sequel that takes the first game and turns it from a quaint little puzzle game into a much more polished experience. I felt like I had my fill of Kururin goodness after the first game and started Paradise a touch burnt out. But boy was I wrong. Paradise breathes new life into what was a quaint but somewhat shallow package. The story, the graphics, the colors, and the music. It gets those Heroine propellers spinning, you know? It's such a step up and feels like a full showing of what Kururin is capable of. The catch is that it was only released in Japan, which is actually rather strange as it reportedly showed up at E3 2002, seemingly confirming a Western release, in North America no less. But it seems for whatever reason, it didn't make the jump. And it's a real shame too, cause this one is excellent. This time, Kururin's family are going to the circus, a performance that Kururin is running late for. As he rushes to the tent, he finds that his family and all the circus members are missing, so he sets off to go and find them. Alright, so the plot is only slightly more complex in scope, but the way it's presented is just so much better. Cutscenes are more than just PNGs with 2 lines of dialogue, and the animations are really neat. It's hardly the best writing you'll ever see, but it's a welcome improvement. Speaking of, one of the major improvements is the simple addition of a spin faster button. No longer must you wait for the Heroine to spin into the optimal position, so there's little in the way of stopping your speedrunning dreams. Of course, the game completely accounts for this new moveset, and thus the times to beat 100% reflect that, which means proper mastery is required to even get close. But the game flows so well when this power is in your hands, and while it mostly just shaves off a few seconds, you really feel the difference. Going back to the original just doesn't feel as slick. And boy, are the levels really neat. The backgrounds and music and shapes of all the courses really do come together to make some really great atmosphere. It feels alive in comparison to the first game, and makes it feel like you're navigating a place more than some random assortment of tight walls. Some levels like this tree one have layouts that are super sporadic, and some change to nighttime when you go down secret paths. It's all just really cool. Also brand new to the game are mini-games. Staged as a kind of boss fight, you're greeted with one of many mini-games when confronting a member of the circus troupe. Instead of the usual avoid the walls gameplay, these all utilize the Heroine's unique control style in a whole heap of different ways. These feel super fresh and break up the potential monotony of the usual levels quite effectively. These are also available via multiplayer now, so it gives that mode a lot more variety. Interestingly, the collectibles from last time are absent, instead replaced with the occasional key. These are used to unlock gates in other levels that lead down new paths and unlock other levels on the main map. These are actually necessary to complete the game this time too. Though, you can still change the Heroine's colour simply by cycling through them with the L button if the basic colour doesn't suit your fancy. Sad to see the shapes go though. Practice, challenge and multiplayer is back of course, but now there is one extra mode in, you guessed it, magic tricks. Yeah, I don't know why this is here either. Every member of Kururin's flock that you rescue unlocks what they call a magic trick. These range from a love tester to actual magic tricks you can perform with the GBA. They're a little strange in that you have to preload them onto the console, turn it off and then on again, and then you can play with the toy until you restart the console again. It's a little weird, and it's a very out of place feature for the game, but hey, charm, right? So, with Kururin Paradise, the series really goes out with a bang. Oozing with charm and stuffed full of creative uses of the concept, it expands over the original by leaps and bounds in every way. It's a real shame that it never got localized, but hey, maybe it'll get put on the Japanese NSO lineup and everyone can give it a spin. Makes you wonder why they stopped at this point after such a great game, but again, they probably did all they could with the concept, so it makes sense to go out while you're on top. Yeah, of course there's one more. Enter the even more obscure third entry to the series, Kururin Squash. Unlike the first two, this one takes the leap into 3D, being on the GameCube of all things in 2004. Again, this one is a Japanese exclusive title, and being on the region-locked GameCube means it really didn't stand a chance in making it to the popular zeitgeist, but exist it does. And it is indeed quite the jump, though not how you might expect. They opt to keep the 2D gameplay intact instead of translating it to a new style, and I can 100% see the logic there. While I'd be keen to see how the 3D gameplay might work, it would definitely be a bit too big of a shake-up to the formula, if you know what I mean. But just like with Paradise, the game gets a new lick of paint in nearly every sense, and Squash manages to carve out its own identity really easily. The music is phenomenal, and while I'm not the biggest fan of the floating field of play over a 3D background style, it still looks quite lovely. And while it's sad to see the lovely sprite work go, the new Paper Mario-esque cutout style for the cutscenes is super clean. Frankly, beautiful. Story-wise, we've got Kururin coming home from a trip with his family to find that everyone but his parents actually went missing along the way. Truly, this family has learnt nothing and never will. So Kururin shoops off in the Heroline yet again to save the day and retrieve his siblings. I don't know why he bothers, because they seem to have zero interest in staying at home and will no doubt run away again at the first opportunity, but who am I to question the diligence of a big brother? But while the plot is borderline the same, the gameplay borderline is not. Instead of adding anything extra to the Heroline's base controls, however, the fresh new West Coast hotness is the different types of Herolines you get to control in every second level or so. We've got the Helibokan, which has punching gloves to destroy rocks in your path, the Helibashan, which can dive underwater, the Helibobo, with a flamethrower on each propeller, the Heliburin, that spins quickly to create whirlwinds, and finally the Helibibune, which shoots out lasers. It's a lot of variety in style, both good and bad. Personally, I enjoy the ones like the Helibokan and Helibudun. They're really fun to mess around with and have some real interesting puzzles thrown their way. The Helibobo, on the other hand, sounds great on paper, but the levels it appears in are borderline insufferable. Unless I'm just bad, which is definitely on the table as an option. The good thing is, if you don't gel with a certain Heroline, they are basically relegated to certain worlds, so once you've done your time, you never have to deal with it again. Those who are just wanting some classic Heroline action might find them a bit of a nuisance as a whole though, as the levels tend to focus a little less on tight navigation to work around the new mechanics. And it's because of this that Squash generally has wider paths than its predecessors, which actually make for a much easier time not getting hit. Great news for those of you who might have struggled with achieving such greatness in the past, but that's not going to help you get those pesky perfect ratings any easier, I'm afraid. Perfect Precision can now share its podium with coins, the new collectible found throughout every level. They act as an incentive to get you to explore or take more risks and can be used to buy items from the shops, but indeed you'll need to collect all of them without getting hit to master a level. Not like I passed the original bar in the previous games, but I think I prefer the simpler take rather than the 2 goals. But hey, that's for the completionist to deal with. Something I really appreciate is the amount of unlockables in the game too. Beating it once unlocks a mode where you simply play as the cockpit with a constant foot on the accelerator, and beating every level in that mode unlocks extra mode with all the levels rotated 45 degrees. They're just fun silly ideas that feel like a worthy reward without the stakes having to be constantly ramped up. Instead of the usual extra levels, your reward for perfecting levels are just skins of the Heroline. But I think that's a bit more appropriate, really. Don't feel like I'm missing out on much by not dedicating my life to 100% completion, you know? Oh yeah, and we've got proper boss battles now. Gone are the minigames, and instead there are 5 big bosses to beat at the end of each level, each utilizing a different type of Heroline. They feel pretty much like a classic Zelda boss, and they're not particularly difficult, but the ramp up in scale is fun to look at for a game that was initially just moving a stick through mazes. They're kinda just a cherry on top to making Squash stand out on its own. And I should mention, multiplayer is back of course, this time round having the options of battles as well as the usual races. There's a bunch of arenas to choose from, and it's a simple case of having to knock your opponents off the stage or whittling down their health to earn points. Item pickups are the various types of Herolines, so it gets rather chaotic. Much more accessible without needing GBA link cables though. And that's it, for real this time. The Kururin series graced us with 3 entries and then humbly bowed out. And honestly, gotta say it's impressive. Nintendo has a reputation for quality, and even as one of its much lesser known IPs, it absolutely delivers. I consider Paradise to be the peak personally, but the other two are very much not far behind. The gameplay is simple but charmingly fun, the OSTs are absolutely top-notch, and overall, the 3 games are just solid action puzzlers. On the language side of things, you could absolutely go through these games without a lick of Japanese and you'll be fine, so they're very import friendly. You might have some trouble messing around with the magic tricks in Paradise, but that's about it. Everything else can be very easily figured out just through playing. And overall, the language used is very simple, so might not be a bad place to get some practice in if you're in the process of learning. I can't see there being much demand or a need for another game, but a remaster or some kind of release of Paradise and Squash would be real rad. Since the original is on NSO, it's not a stretch to think that Paradise could make the same jump, even if it is just on the Japanese one. Can't deny things are looking grim for Squash though, unless a virtual console-esque option appeared for the GameCube, but I just can't see it getting the attention necessary to even warrant a revisit on Nintendo's part, sadly. Kinda hilarious how the 2 really good games in the series are the 2 that people don't have access to or even know about, but hey, what can you do? That being said, if you want some more Kururin action in any form, might I introduce you to the super rad indie title Roundabout? It takes the already off-the-wall concept and slaps it into a crazy taxi-esque FMV game. We're talking a constantly spinning limousine, flagrantly ignored manslaughter, and a silent protagonist with absurd character drama. It is an absolute time. Not for every yarn, mind you, but if you think that you've got a good bit of nonsense in your humour, allow me to humbly recommend it.